You look for the test? Yes.
Yeah, look for it. I've seen it.
Oh, okay. Coley says he saw it, but he didn't try it yet.
Okay. So you guys have until Friday to do the test. For some reason, I could not get the lockdown browser thing to work, so that's probably good for you guys, right? I think it's pretty straightforward, though. Half of it is matching. So, well, it's time to move on to.
Question about the test. Is that a proctored test, or can we just do that whenever?
You can do it whenever. It's on Blackboard. The exams are going to be proctored. So, but I think the test, each unit test will probably just be on Blackboard online. I don't think it's too bad personally, but definitely pay attention to the quizzes, and especially places where you miss. I think we got all the quizzes in. There were a couple of questions that I wanted to address on some of those quizzes that people did not get correct, and that might help with the exam. One of them was about where crops are produced. Anybody tell me, where are most of the crops produced in the U.S.? Other than the grains in the Midwest, where else? Well, big thing here on that question, where crops are produced, is the area where they grow best. And that's why that's not just in the United States, it's around the world. At least in industrialized countries where we have a globalized economy, we're shipping crops around the world because they are produced easier and better in the particular areas where they are produced. So it's really kind of based on how climate best helps to produce those crops. So anybody else have any other questions before we move on? All right, well, let's get into Unit 2, Chapter 6. Looking at the structure of plants, and we're talking about higher plants here. We're not really going to be discussing the least evolved crops, or plants, sorry, because they are not really grown as crops. So you guys definitely take a look at the PowerPoint. Read the book material. Chapter 6 is really long. It's chock full of good information. I'm just really going to just highlight things I think you need to know most, and those that will be most useful for you in crop production in terms of plant science. So definitely skipping over quite a bit here. If you look at the chapter 6 PowerPoint unedited, there's like 111 slides. So we're paring it down quite a bit. I would definitely recommend you guys look through that, but we're going to kind of skip over a lot of the material. Let me share my screen here. All right, you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. So, structure of plants. Kind of going back, and we talked a little bit about the taxonomy last week, but I wanted to touch on a little bit more of that, as at least what they go over. First, we're kind of looking at two main classes of plants in terms of our crops. Our major food fiber wood are in the gymnosperm and angiosperm classes. So that's like a kind of a step below phylum. So they say ornamental plants in the book too, but I mean there are plenty of ornamentals that are, ferns or mosses are now being used as ornament. So I'm not really going to include ornamental in that as well. But generally, the majority of our food fiber and wood crops are either gymnosperms or angiosperms. Gymnosperms are the cone-bearing plants. The angiosperms are the flowering plants. These are classes, but they're also actually their own phylums as well. And the big one that we look at is the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, the most evolved plants. And we have two subclasses of angiosperms, monocots and dicots. And right now, we'll expand on this, but right now, big thing on monocot and dicot. Monocots have one cotyledon, the seed leaf that pops up, and dicots have two. Looking at a monocot that everyone's probably familiar with, corn, Zea mays. They have a little bit of a different, I mean, this is kind of the same idea for both monocots and dicots, but a little bit different in the seed world. So again, say we plant a corn seed. First, it begins to bring in moisture into the seed to germinate. When it germinates, first we have the radicle, which is the primary root, and you can actually kind of see it in most seeds. It's just like a little appendage kind of sticking out. That's like the primordial root, basically. Once it germinates, that radicle plummets into the soil, and then the plumule is the primary shoot. It's the first thing that pops up. In monocots, it looks like just one little wrapped up grass blade in a way. Then the radicle tends to grow down through this kind of specialized root stem, if you will, known as the coleorhiza. And then from there, we have more roots being developed. So seeds are pretty amazing, really. I mean, when we look at any seed, whether it's a monocot or a dicot, everything is contained that plant needs for its growth in this one unique little package that can stay dormant for a long time. We could go on and on about seeds, but we'll talk about them later. A couple other things on the monocots, and this is not unique to monocots, but while we're talking about corn, it's worthy of mentioning. We have adventitious roots, and in corn, these are known as anchor or brace or prop roots. I'm sure you guys have all seen them if you've grown corn. They basically grow out kind of aerially, and then they help to prop up the plant to prevent things like lodging. Adventitious roots are those that come from any other tissue other than actual roots. And you can kind of see them popping up down here as well. They're coming out of the stem rather than from the coleorhiza, the primary root. Another thing here on corn that just because it's kind of, we can see it now, we're talking about the female and male flowers. Female flowers, referring to the female flower part, is the pistil. We call them pistillate. And in corn, those are the ears. Male flowers are staminate or stamens, and they are tassels. And here that is pictured here. There's our male flower tasseling, and there's our female flower silking. And then we get the mature fruit, really, which in corn is called a caryopsis. Big thing I want you guys to know there. Corn, of course, is wind pollinated like most grasses. And each ovary, basically, well, was an ovule, just kind of very similar to what it is in humans. They're in lines. We call them kernels, but botanically speaking, they're known as a caryopsis. That becomes the true seed. Let's look at an example of a dicot. And ironically, they chose to look at a bean. And remember, corn and beans together, a legume grain combination that makes a complete amino acid. Very culturally important to really all agricultural civilizations. Nonetheless, bean they chose as their dicot counterpart. It's a little bit different process as the seed grows. First of all, they come up with two cotyledons, I see here in that graphic labeled F. The other difference is that rather than having a Coleorhiza, they have a hypocotyl, which is kind of the stem that props it up, basically. So a little bit reverse in dicots. Rather than having that primordial kind of primary root, they have a primordial kind of primary stem, which you get rapid growth on both ends. So it's hypocotyl in beans. Another thing, again, early on, and we'll talk more about this later on, but the apical and meristems. The meristem, anytime you see that word meristem, just think of active plant growth. The apical or apical meristem is, kind of the highest point of that, where all growth is kind of coming from. In beans, the flowers are self-pollinated, and they turn into fruits that are pods that contain the beans. Let's see, I'm kind of skipping over a few things here, but next thing I really want to focus on is thinking about what's going on inside of the cell. And again, we're not going to get extremely in-depth on cellular information, but we will at least cover the basics. And inside of the cell, we actually have kind of this primordial ooze in a way. That's known as the cytoplasm. That's where like everything inside of the cell is kind of floating around in the cytoplasm. And plant scientists are actually finding that the cytoplasm is much more important than they initially thought. More on that here in a minute. Really basic thing here on cell structure. We have basically two types of cells in life. We have prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And just know that the prokaryotic do not have separate subcellular units. They are basically the most primordial cells out there, and they're only found in really primitive organisms, like some bacteria and blue-green algae. Everything else is basically eukaryotic, where they do have kind of compartmentalized subcellular units that have particular structures and functions. And we call these organelles. So that's kind of, we go down to the cellular level, the things inside of the cell that are floating around in that cytoplasm are the organelles. And they each have kind of a specialized task that allows life to operate. Here the organelles are pictured, at least plant organelles. Many of these are actually the same organelles that we have in humans too, although some of them are specialized for plants. And it's kind of hard to really pick out each individual thing in this drawing. Usually we see them kind of in stylized graphics, but they actually chose to use a photomicrograph of a plant cell here, which is pretty cool. But it's kind of hard to see some of this stuff. I definitely recommend kind of looking at some of these names, and we'll go over a few of these right now. Okay, so as I mentioned, we got the cytoplasm, and that's kind of encased in this protoplast with a plasma membrane. But again, it's kind of that fluid that everything is kind of floating around in. And if you actually are watching cell division, you'll see what is known as cytoplasmic streaming, kind of just the movement of the organelles, as well as the cytoplasm itself when cells are dividing. Big things in plant specialized organelles, we have chromoplasts, which contain the plant pigments. Which, hey, we're getting ready to see some fall leaf color. You guys have anything going on in your neck of the woods? Any leaves changing color? Not yet, huh?
Got a few of them just turning brown and falling, but no.
Really not getting any leaf color yet? We're getting a little bit here up in the higher elevations, but I'm hoping that we have a good leaf season. Always attracts a lot of tourists here.
I think the dead leaves we have on the ground got blown off of the trees by the hurricane, but still, they never had a chance to turn colors.
Well, hopefully you guys will get some good leaf color. And that's really what we're thinking of here. The chromoplasts are actually the true plant pigment. And when the leaves are green, what we see is the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll then dies, and then the chloroplasts kind of reveal the true color of the leaves, if you will. It's really kind of cool. If you think about the electromagnetic spectrum of that plants are able to kind of absorb, they absorb everything on either end except for the very center of the spectrum, which is green. And they reflect green in the chlorophyll. So that's why we see green leaves. Every once in a while, we'll see some anthocyanin pigmentation, some purple color that really, or reddish color that is vibrant in particular plants. That's where the chloroplasts have kind of a specialized kind of thing where they're able to be seen without the chlorophyll dye. So anyway, just know that chlorophyll is where basically photosynthesis takes place, and the chloroplasts are actually the true pigments, and also can kind of do some photosynthesis as well. All right. Mitochondria, I'm sure you guys have talked about this before in biology classes, but mitochondria is kind of known as the powerhouse of the cell. That's where a lot of protein synthesis takes place, and where adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is an important energy carrying compound, is produced. Just remember, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. The nucleus, of course, is kind of the brain of the cell, and inside of the nucleus is our chromosomes, which contains DNA. And of course, that's very important for genetic code and how that's transcribed to tell how things lived. However, DNA is not only found in chromosomes in the nucleus, it's also found to a certain point in mitochondria, in the cytoplasm, and in the chloroplasts. And earlier I was saying that they're finding that cytoplasm is more important than they initially thought, and that's actually coming from this idea that we actually have DNA in cytoplasm, and we actually get a little bit of genetic mixture just in cytoplasm exchange. Next, the vacuoles are the kind of the water-containing parts of the cells, extremely important for plants. So associate vacuoles with water, will be good there. Cell walls, kind of very important in plant because they actually provide the structure for plants to be turgid, basically, and they still allow some things to actually move through the cell walls, but very important in plants to provide rigidity and structure to the plant. In many plants, especially woody plants, we get, and as well as some woody perennials, we get some kind of secondary cell wall type, as you call it, I'm not exactly sure what different delineation of it, but we call them lignans, suberins, and cutins, and these are kind of like enzymes that the plant produces to kind of continue that growth and that rigidity in the higher plants. And by higher, I mean I'm talking about taller plants, like trees, for instance. You couldn't have trees without lignans, suberins, and cutins. When you actually cut a branch or remove a tree, these are the enzymes that are utilized to begin the healing process. Whenever we have large areas of organized cells of a similar structure, they create tissue. Just like in people, it's the same deal. We have a lot of different cells, and within the cells, we have the organelles that have their specific jobs. Multiple cells come together to create tissues, and then tissues create organs, so on and so forth. And of course, the organs are a little bit different in plants than they are in people, of course. back to that meristem right there, or meristematic tissue. These are the areas of plants that are actively growing. That's where we have active cell division. And it's really important, especially for plant propagation, because that's the area where the cells are kind of primordial, where they're not yet differentiated, but they can be. So this is the area where they're saying, all right, you're going to be stem tissue, you're going to be leaf tissue, you're going to be flower tissue. It all happens in the meristem or meristematic regions, because these are not just in one place. We don't just see them in the stem, but we also see them in the root. Excuse me, I can't speak this morning. Again, the apical meristem it's kind of the terminus of both the above ground and below ground parts of the plant. That's where the actual cells are being differentiated. Looking at roots, which of course root meristems are the ends of the roots where the roots are actively dividing. And in some cases, like pictured here, we have a carrot that has a dominant taproot and limited kind of lateral growth. That's kind of where that active meristematic region, kind of here at the end of the root, and this is kind of the very tip of that taproot, is a very important region where the energy kind of moves out and cells actually divide. But then other plants do not have a taproot. Instead, they have fibrous root systems. And most, not all, but many monocots have more fibrous root systems. A lot of dicots have taproot systems. There are kind of cases where each of them have, some monocots will have taproots and some dicots will have fibrous roots. But for the most part, that's kind of how it goes. Dicots, tap, monocots, fibrous. We also have lateral meristems. So plants don't just have meristems going up and then down, but they also have meristems coming out. And here we have it here in the cambium. We have kind of two types of cambium. Vascular cambium, where it's actually, and think of vascular as sort of transport networks. Like our vascular system, of course, are our veins and arteries. Vascular systems in plants, we're looking at xylem and phloem, which transport water and food up and down the stem. So that's the vascular cambium, the area here where new phloem and xylem is being formed. We also have an area of actively dividing tissue in the cork cambium, where it's producing mostly bark, kind of the outer layer of tissue of any plant, not just. In this picture here, you can kind of see it happening in trees. And of course, if you've ever looked at a tree trunk, you can look at the rings to, look at a year's growth. So that area kind of right around the ring, where that actual ring is the cambium. And all of it's dead, right? It's everything behind the actively growing cambium that's laterally growing is dead tissue. All right, some simple tissues we'll look at here. These are kind of more permanent tissues. Just a few things here. The epidermis, just like in humans, the epidermis is that exterior layer of cells, kind of like the skin of the plant. The important part about the epidermis in plants, though, is that's actually where transpiration takes place, where we have water being released, gas exchange. And that happens in the stomata, which we'll hit up again here in a little bit. In some epidermal tissues, we also have kind of these elongated hairs, which are known as trichomes. And Most plants have these trichomes. In some plants, though, that's actually where a lot of the kind of medicinal constituents of plants are contained. A lot of the active chemicals of plants are contained in the trichomes. They're not always as developed as they are in this B picture. Sometimes they're just more hair-like, as you kind of see in these hairs on A. And these are different levels of magnification, but you can see kind of the bulbous form there in the A, and then close up of the bulb, and you can see the other hairs as well in there. And then see even a closer look. You can kind of see where there's, in this case, this is in an elm, you can actually see where there's some cellular growth right there, and that's probably where some chemicals are being produced. Usually the trichomes are actually where they're producing chemicals to help guard the plants. So for instance, in poison ivy, that's where you have the urushiol, that oil that causes the rash. Or in like a stinging nettle, that's where you have these barbed hairs that actually are responsible for stinging people and other animals. So be aware of the trichomes and their interesting uses. Look at the xylem. Of course, is a very complex tissue, and that's what conducts water, moves it through the plant. And originally they thought that xylem was just upward. You're just moving water from roots to all parts of the plant. But now we know that xylem is actually, you can move some nutrients and other things up and down the xylem. Same deal with the phloem. You probably talked about how phloem, again, transports food usually from the leaves downward, but it's also responsible for moving some nutrients as well. So xylem is more water and phloem is more food, but actually they both are responsible for moving nutrients. The big thing on phloem that I want you guys to think about is that you're kind of moving more of the photosynthetically active metabolites from leaf tissues to other parts of the plant. Roots are pretty complex. There are lots of different parts of the root, and if you want to know more about roots, take a look and look more into it. But for time's sake, we're going to kind of skip over most of the parts of the root. I do want you to know, though, that in order for water, in the soil solution that carries nutrients into the roots, it has to actually pass through cell walls, and it's really fascinating how that happens. The plant kind of creates these root hairs, and in that actually makes some semi-permeable cell walls that will allow water to travel in it. It's one of those things that's cool. It's the miracle of life, right? Hey, back to the adventitious roots. Again, adventitious roots are those that form basically from any other type of plant tissue other than just roots themselves. And then they actually develop into roots. Adventitious roots are extremely important for plant propagation, at least asexual plant propagation, for us to take advantage of some, natural plant formation. We can use adventitious roots to grow and propagate new plants and preserve genetics. Stems, of course, are also extremely important for anchoring and holding up the plant. And really, stem and root tissue is actually pretty similar on the inside. It's a little bit different on the outside because we have the collenchyma and the parenchyma kind of along with that cambium forming this outer layer of tissue that helps to protect the plant. But it's really similar to roots, and in many cases, stems and roots often get kind of confused. So here's a couple of specialized stems that are often confused with roots. First, a rhizome. That's an underground stem growing horizontally. So that's often thought of as a root, but it's actually a stem. we see that in a lot of monocots, really. Bananas, canna lilies, irises, bamboo, many of the grasses that are really bad weeds produced through rhizomes. There are also a lot of dicots that have rhizomes as well. And again, this is kind of a way that plants sort of asexually propagate. For a long time, it was thought that the largest organism on planet Earth was a grove of aspen trees in Colorado, where they did some DNA analysis and found that for, I think, let's say it's over a mile of this aspen tree was actually connected by rhizomes. So genetically, they were all the same tree. Today, they actually found out that there are fungi that are actually much larger in terms of area, that take up several miles just in terms of their mycelium. Nonetheless, rhizome, underground stem. Stolons are stems that actually we can get both above ground and below ground stolons, but generally we think of these as kind of runners. And you see those if you looked at strawberry plants, they have these long stems coming out that kind of grow like little baby plants on them. We call them plantlets. Those are known as stolons. It's kind of a different kind of stem. Corms, another type of stem, and really I think of corms and bulbs, and it's really kind of the same kind of deal pretty much. These are kind of specialized stems that have, again, they're kind of underground, but you can actually see them sometimes growing above ground too, but they're like storage organisms. And stems often grow specialized storage organs, such as bulbs, which are these highly compressed underground stems that we see in a lot of our lily family plants, especially those that we use for ornamental purposes, the early spring blooming bulbs like hyacinths, daffodils, tulips, stuff like that. We also see it in onions. Onions, of course, are kind of above ground, so it's a little bit different. Technically, though, that's still a bulb. It's a highly compressed stem that has many storage leaves that we look at as scales. Tubers are often also stems, technically, and even though they're kind of growing underground and look like they have roots coming off of them, they're actually technically still stems. So we see that, of course, the classic case in the potato. Important thing here on leaves, of course, we know that leaves are extremely important for photosynthesis as well as transpiration. Important difference in monocots and dicots is how the leaves actually appear. And in monocots, they're kind of strap-shaped, usually longer leaves that have parallel veination. In dicots, they have more net-like veination, and they often tend to be more broad. Just some different leaf shapes. The book has all kinds of good graphics like this in there. But here we're looking at dicots, except for this one kind of linear leaf. That's a monocot, or maybe the subulate too, because you can see the parallel veination. Here's the net veination. You have one midrib and then other ribs, veins coming off of that main leaf. Many different sizes and shapes, and this is really important for helping to identify plants, how the leaves are arranged and what their sizes and shapes are. So I'd encourage you guys to look through that. Talked about transpiration, and again, transpiration is a lot more important than kind of initially outlined in early biology classes. But we have transpiration taking place. That's really the movement of water through and to the outside of the plant. So the plant is like a conduit, sucking water from the roots through the plant and out of the leaves to transpire, which is extremely important in maintaining leaf temperature. Also extremely important in maintaining the turgor of the plant. And also the respiration, which is actually where the plant is growing. Without transpiration, the plant cannot respire and could not grow. So it's kind of one of those key to life things. You know, it's the plant's version of breathing. Leaves are made of, and again, I'm not going to go over every part of the leaf, inside or out, but the blade is the flat, thin part of the leaf, and the petiole is the leaf stem. Just definitely know those. On compound leaves, we kind of have a little bit of a different arrangement. The thing with the compound leaves, if you guys are trying to identify plants and you're like, which is a simple leaf, which is a compound? I always like to look at the petiole, the leaf stem itself. If you trace that back to the main stem, a simple leaf just has one petiole, right? A compound leaf would have multiple leaflets on one petiole. Key things about flowers here. An inflorescence is a cluster of flowers. Also can help in identification of plants, especially species. And many flowers that we see in a lot of our plants are actually groups of flowers. It's not just one singular flower, it's many different flowers. And when we're looking at a single flower, we can look at a flower itself as having one ovary, being connected to one ovary. So, for instance, cornflower is both on the male and female end is an inflorescence because you have multiple ovaries. Each of those silks is actually a pistil, and here we're looking at the pistil as basically all the female parts together. The stamen is all the male parts together. That silk is the pistil in corn, right? And it goes from the outside of that husk, and then it connects down to each single ovary, which then forms into this caryopteris that we were talking about earlier. All right, so again, flowers come in many shapes and sizes, and these are all just different types of inflorescences, other than, of course, the solitary one, because that's just one flower. But we have spikes, racemes, panicles, cymes, indeterminate umbels. These are very important in botany to look at. I'm not going to have you guys memorize any of those, though. Talking about flowers, we have kind of both complete and incomplete flowers. And in this case, we have complete flowers. In the rose family, the Rosaceae, as we mentioned last week, we have a lot of our fruit trees like apples and apricots, and they have very particular types of floral arrangements, but they have complete flowers because they have both male and female parts on the same flower. Incomplete flowers basically lack either male or female flowers. Another important thing here I want to point out, monoecious and dioecious. And this is not the same as complete and incomplete or perfect or imperfect flowers. It's a little bit different. It's basically that in monoecious plants, you have both male and female flowers on the same plant. Dioecious, we have them on two different plants. And we can look at the Latin there. Monoecious means one house, both on the same plant. Dioecious, we have two houses. So a male plant and a female plant. And that really becomes important for production of many different types of plants, whether or not you want seed production to take place. For some particular plants, you might not want seed production. That can affect biochemistry of some plants. So therefore, if it's a dioecious plant, you want to keep your male and females away from each other. Other plants, we want the fruit and the seeds. So in that case, we do want the male and females together. So we can actually see that on some fruit trees, for instance. You guys have seen hollies before. We have hollies are dioecious. So you'll have some hollies that are loaded with fruit and then some that have none. And that's the difference in a male and a female. Kind of already mentioned this, but again, monoecious has both sexes on the same plant. Kind of a poor picture there. On fruits, and I just wanted to point this out, we had kind of a debate on the whole thing with tomatoes and how they're legally defined as a vegetable, but botanically speaking, they're fruits. And many of the, quote, vegetables that we eat, unquote, are actually fruits. Because botanically, anything that comes from, sexual reproductive parts of the plant is a fruit. And we got many different kinds of fruits. We have simple fruits. We've got fleshy fruits. Looking at fleshy fruits, we've got berries, which, again, berry is a term that is not often used in the botanical sense. It's often used kind of incorrectly because technically bananas, dates, grapes, peppers, tomatoes, and papayas are all berries. And that's because they have this kind of specialized pulp in which they have carpels connecting to the seeds. And those are berries. Some of the things that we call berries are actually not berries at all. This Hesperidium is a specific type of fruit that's unique to the citrus family. Now, pepo is, I thought they had a picture there, I guess they don't. Pepo is a unique fruit that is in the squash family. A drupe is a fruit that is not just unique to the rose family, but often many of the rose family plants have drupes. Think of a drupe as a fruit that has just one singular seed in it. And of course, peaches, plums, cherries, almonds are all in that rose family. However, avocados, they're drupes technically. They have one seed. Olives, they're drupes. They're in different families. Pomes are also unique to the rose family, and actually there's only a few: apple, pear, and quince, and they have these unique kind of dry cells within them. We have dehiscent fruits that split open at maturity to expose the seeds. We got legumes or pods in the bean family. Then we have capsules that have, really most of these are just in the flower world. Ornamental plants. We don't have crops that have capsules because they would be extremely difficult to actually obtain the seeds. Although I guess you could consider poppy seeds as kind of a crop in a way. Really, I guess we can look at anything as a crop that we get some sort of useful product out of. But nonetheless, I digress. Let's move on. More fruits. We got follicles. Again, kind of just mostly in just a couple of particular flowering plant families. Silex are unique to the mustard family. Indehiscent fruits are those generally that do not split open when mature. Achenes are simple one-seeded, very thin fruits that attach to an ovary wall. And we can see achenes often being mistaken for seeds, like in this case, in the strawberry. Also in rose hips and sunflowers. Caryopsis, here we go. Mentioned this earlier. The one-seeded fruit. Most of our grains are caryopsis, or caryopses, I should say. Nuts are one-seeded fruits that are thick, hard, and have a stony pericarp. Samaras we see on some trees, another unique fruit that has a wing-like structure that aids in its dispersal. Schizocarp is where we have two or more carpels kind of fusing together that often kind of make sort of compound seeds. We can see that carrots, dill, caraway. Again, these are all in the same family. Notice that a lot of these fruits are unique to particular plant families. Aggregate and multiple fruits, such as strawberries, blackberries, and raspberries. Again, these are kind of multiple flowers together, an inflorescence, a cluster of flowers that have many different little cells that are really technically each individually a fruit, which is why we call them aggregate or multiple fruits. You can also see that actually in a fig, a pineapple, or also mulberries, all botanically a little bit different and not in the same families, but kind of just similar things where fruits are fused together. That's good for us, right? Seeds, kind of last thing here today, and there's a lot more to seeds than what we're talking about right here, but they are the mature ovules. That contain the genetic information of the plants and have all of the nutrition necessary to get plants started once they're germinated. So again, they're mature ovules. They've been fertilized, and it causes the fruit to kind of change. We can see this in often in aiding the plant's mode of dissemination or dispersal, such as in milkweed or in dandelion. They have these things called a pappus, like a little parachute basically that allows them to fly on the wind. Same deal with maples and ashes. They have these samaras that, again, we think of the samara as kind of like the helicopter seed. It allows them to disseminate those seeds. And the important thing I want you guys to think about here with specialized seeds and fruits too is that they're often kind of evolved in order to get the children, basically the propagules, as far away from the adult plant as possible. Because like really all living organisms, the goal of life is to reproduce and to continue that line of genetics, that DNA. So it's not evolutionary advantageous to be, having your fruit not fall too far from the seed. Too far from the tree. Excuse my bastardization of the expression. Anyway, what I'm saying there is that if you think about it, in the plant world, they don't necessarily need to shelter their young like we do in the animal world. So it's more advantageous for them to get their children as far away from them as possible. In most fruits, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, but then it's a bribe, basically. It's a bait, and it usually gets animals to come and move the seeds for them. Know the three basic parts of the seed here: the embryo, the cotyledons, which are the seed leaves, and then the seed coats. And we're out of time, and that's actually that whole first chapter of Unit 2. I know that's a lot of information, so again, please let me know if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns about any of the material that we've covered here. I'm going to give you guys a little while before we open up a quiz for Chapter 6. But wanted to go ahead and give you an introduction to that material and get us started. All right, well, you guys have a great day, and good luck on finishing up the test.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Bye, everybody.
See ya.